So welcome back, and thank you for all those questions. We won't, I'm afraid, be able to cover all of the queries tonight, as we do want to conclude matters here by 9:30. But I hope, in terms of the questions that we are going to look at over the next while, that they will be of interest to you all. So I'm going to start with Karen. And I think here's a question that maybe some of the adults in the room have been waiting for all night. And we didn't really hear too much about it. What type of sanctions, punishments, if any, work best with adolescents? Now there's the question.
Well, punishment is a little bit more difficult, obviously, with adolescents. I often say to parents that they're really no different than your 2 to 5 year old, except they're much larger. You can't just pick them up and put them on the naughty step when they're not doing what you ask them to do. You can't just take away the toy. They're as big as you. They're going to walk out of the house. You know, it's a different situation. But often their actions are quite similar if you think about it. So I usually would try to advise parents to, in any situation where you anticipate a conflict, try to come prepared with, let's say, like you would with your 2-year-old, 2 choices, both of which are acceptable to the parent, and yet allow the adolescent to feel that they have agency and they're empowered to make a decision and they're not just being told what to do. And they're more likely to then kind of go along with what it is that you're asking them to do. But in adolescence, it really is about leveraging your relationship with them and leveraging your influence more so than it is punishing them. So you know what they want. They want, you to continue to pay for the data package on their smartphone, or they want those new runners, or they want, permission to go to this party, or whatever it is. Each young person is different. And so it is about kind of tying those things together, that these things don't just come for free, that there's conditions to be met for me to believe you're responsible enough to go to that party, for me to trust that you're going to go to that party, for me to pay for that new smartphone or the new runners. That I'd like you to do your chores, or I'd like you to attend school, or we're going to wait and see the results of that exam. So you basically try to shift their motivators or shift their reinforcers so that they do the right thing.
Also, I think one of the biggest things we come across is that parents immediately will say, or not even parents, anyone will say, if you do this, this is the consequence, and then you don't follow through with the consequence. And so the first moment we'll say to parents, the first time you do that it means that any consequence from then on, the young person knows that they can get around it because you're not going to stick to it. And it's okay to come back and say, well, you're grounded for 2 months because they snuck out at night. I can't really enforce that. It's okay to come back and say, look, I was angry at that point in time. 2 months is too much, but the consequence for this behavior is going to be this, and still follow through with it. What we also know with teenagers is that when you hold a line and they know where that line is, they stick to it for the most part. They'll try and toe the line, they'll try and step over it occasionally, but the way we operate is that there are rules and we can have fun and but you step over a line and there are consequences to that, and everyone knows that. So I guess that's just something that's quite important to note.
Yes, never threaten something you're not prepared to actually follow through on. And when you ground an adolescent, you have to realize that you're also grounded. Because you have to stay home to make sure that they're grounded.
That's it. It's tough going. Here's an issue that's come up, and a number of people here have brought it up. The whole issue of bereavement in terms of any resources to help with a loss of a parent. There's a question here in terms of a grandparent. How best do I support my grandchildren? whose dad, my son, has died. So a very sad situation, but something clearly that some children are having to deal with in their lives.
I think generally working with young people who have experienced a loss, that you want to support them in continuing to remember that person as best, depending on the age they were when the person passed away. Then, they may or may not have clear memories in their own head. You can use photographs, family albums, to kind of keep that person alive in telling stories about them. And again, maybe not chasing the young person around with the stories, when they're in the frame of mind where they're asking questions or they want to know, or it's the anniversary or Christmas or a birthday. Those are special times to take a moment to commemorate, to acknowledge that the person is not with you in the present, but is always with you in your heart, is with the family, and to not be afraid yourselves to talk about it. Sometimes families sort of become isolated from each other in grief, because if I talk about it, then you cry, so I don't want to make you cry. If you talk about it, then I cry, so you don't want to make me cry. And then everybody's grieving the same loss, but nobody's able to comfort each other or share together. So it is important to provide that space and those memories, and to always be willing to talk when the young person is asking questions or wants to talk about it.
Yeah, just on that I think young people deal with grief in the same way that everyone does, in that it's different, and and it's also very raw. So that first loss of someone in a young person's life can be very confusing, and it is sort of that lack of understanding or conversation previous to that around not having a person present, and where maybe you as a grandparent or as a parent have witnessed grief, have been a part of losing someone. You understand that it will be okay. Young people don't generally understand that it will be okay, and that getting past grief, there is a life after that, and that that loss will always be there, but it's okay. And I think going back to family traditions and how families operate is always an important place to revert back to. So what is a family, what did they do before, how did they connect, and not losing those very important sort of family rituals or traditions.
Thank you. Here's a different question. Do many of the young children, people that you work with, have language disorder? If so, how do you accommodate this? So language disorder. And also, how do you support a young person with mental health difficulties and ASD, autism spectrum disorder? And there was a third one, I think. Where is the data from? I presume in terms of some of the data that you showed. So it's about the issue of language disorder, and then mental health difficulties and ASD.
So yes, we do work with young people with language disorders. We have a wonderful speech and language therapist that comes onto the unit once a week and will assess and diagnose and treat any language disorder problems. If it's quite significant, where the young person doesn't understand complex questioning, or they don't respond to this type of talking that I'm doing right now that is really around the bush. A young person might need direct questions. They might need clear communication, especially in the classroom. Our teacher, Betty, who's in the audience, will pick it up quite quickly and will adapt straight away to those needs. So from the moment that young person walks into the ward, we would assess and be talking as a team as to the best way to support the young person to to communicate with us as staff and to also be communicated with. So it's a great question, and yes, we do adapt to it. And I think language disorders are probably something that are being diagnosed more and more in the last 5 years, specifically in schools where children and young people aren't able to process information in the classroom, and it's being recognised, whereas it hasn't probably been recognised before. So it's actually fantastic. In regards to treating young people with autism spectrum disorder and mental health difficulties, we also do that. ASD it's an autism spectrum disorder, so the level and the intensity of the disorder is on a spectrum. You can have young people who are very high functioning and maybe have social communication difficulties, or are a bit rigid in their thinking, but for the most part you wouldn't know that they had ASD. And then you can get young people who are sort of quite low functioning and maybe can't communicate verbally, and we wouldn't be a unit that would see young people to that level. Sometimes we have seen young people with quite severe intellectual disabilities, but in terms of treating ASD and mental health, it's really the way we would treat anyone with mental health problems. It's getting to know the person and understanding them at their level and how they interact with the world. Sometimes it is about adapting how we communicate with them, how we ask questions. With ASD, you do have to be very specific because there's a very literal and logical way of talking, and they won't understand sort of more abstract questions. So you do have to be quite clever, I think, in how you negotiate that with them. We do that, and once you understand how they need their needs to be met, then we can definitely do that. But once again, it's something that's being diagnosed and recognised more, and I think it will be an area for the future that we'll be building.
Yeah, just maybe it was that question about the data. I think you referred to some Irish studies, and I was
that, didn't I?
And I myself, I was very struck by the material you presented there in respect of mobile phone use and the Irish. I think it was an Irish study or that.
Yeah, so a lot of the data we found were actually research done, just published in articles, news articles and things, but there was research that was done by tech companies or marketing companies as well that are chasing what are teenagers into and what are they doing, and so how can we make money out of them, pretty much. But it's really interesting data, and it's mean, you have to look at the most recent and up to date data, I think, when you're looking at technology.
Thank you. Next question here on that issue again of the technology, that concerns about the effect of the challenges for our young people arising from, as it's put here, the threat of the internet. What interventions have you witnessed that have clear positive results? So I presume it's that whole, and they'll go on about national government strategies. So that concern about acknowledging the internet is there on the social media, and what is effective in terms of for a young person in facing the challenges arising?
I think we touched on it throughout the presentation, but it really is about communication between adults and young people. And I think the biggest problem often is that as adults we don't fully understand what our young people are being exposed to or what they're facing, and that's somewhere where we need to sort of educate ourselves. We also need to help our young people, just like we wouldn't let them stay out all night or, go roaming the streets with their friends, after dark or wherever else we would put boundaries as adults for our young people, we need to also help them put boundaries around their technology use. And just because it's this, I've had so many conversations with parents and young people when they're getting ready for discharge about how to get the mobile phone or the iPad or whatever else it is out of the bedroom at night, because of the impact that it has, not just on them checking things, but often there's story after story after story of the young person coming down in the morning, bleary-eyed, having gotten no sleep because they were up trying to talk to their friend who was upset all night long, or they received a disturbing message about their boyfriend being with somebody else, or something like that in the middle of the night. Like, none of us are thinking straight at 2 a.m. We need to just be asleep. You don't need to be getting these pings and all this stuff. But these devices are so clever. They have become everything. They're our alarm clock. They're the music that we listen to go to sleep. They're our cameras. They're where we do our homework. It's all in one. And that seems like a great benefit, an amazing little device. But it can be quite detrimental in that, you have to pare it back and remember we all once had alarm clocks. They were a one-use device. We all once had, radios or tape players or CD players. There's other ways to meet all these needs. And yes, it means a bunch of different devices maybe, and not just the one shop fits all in your little phone, but to protect yourself and your young people from this constantly being on and all the time access. I think it is up to us, first of all, to role model boundaries around that, protecting ourselves, and then to scaffold and then enforce those boundaries for our young people. So that might mean, in some families it's all the phones are in a basket on the chargers in the kitchen. Now, of course, you hear about the young person who gets up in the middle of the night, sneaks down and takes the phone back up to the room. In which case you would respond with, okay, now it's in my room under the bed or in a locked place or whatever you needed to do. You just kind of keep taking it to the next level if you have to. But often, again, if we're all doing it, if the parents as well are leaving their phones out of the bedroom, then it's easier to help them learn to manage it. So unfortunately, it's not going to go away. It is the current reality, and people are constantly innovating and coming up with new things. It's hard to keep up. So it isn't about shunning it or saying it's the devil or it's awful, but it is about helping our young people learn to manage it and that they can set boundaries on that. I'll be at the dinner table and my phone will be over somewhere else and it'll beep and my son will be like, "Do you need to check that text?" I'm like, "No, we're eating dinner. It'll be okay." Like, it'll wait. And sort of role modeling that kind of behavior for our young people will help them to do it as well. Anything to add?
If you ever want any parenting advice, you should talk to Karen.
I think we're learning that all right. And maybe just one final question, briefly. The whole issue of participation in sports, and you brought this up, that it's a great protective factor against all kinds of stress, mental health issues, and indeed substance abuse. However, it seems that teenage girls are reducing their involvement, and how can this be addressed? And why does it happen? And the other thing in association with this is bringing up the kind of whole thing, adolescence, great time for creativity and encouraging that side of things.
I know a recent study has come out saying that there's a huge drop-off at puberty for girls participating in sports. So, first off, it's not everyone has to be into sports. There's other activities, as Kim was pointing out. There's, horse riding or art or, the chess team or choir or, acting, whatever it is that your young person is interested in. It doesn't have to be sport. It's just about being involved and engaged, in Sea Scouts or again, anything at all. But for girls who are quite sporty and who are quite into sport, there does seem to be this wall that a lot of them hit right around puberty where they do start to drop out. I think a lot of that is due to puberty and to the physical changes and to becoming self-conscious all of a sudden. Everything is different about your body, the way it works, running around. Maybe you used to be on a co-ed team, but now the boys are faster, taller, stronger. all of that comes into play. And it's also not, I guess, particularly feminine to be, all sweaty and rough and tumble. Although I do think it's certainly easier, from my mother's generation to my generation. And I would like to think that it is more and more acceptable for girls to be physical and sporty as well. But I think it's about having that conversation and talking with them, as they're approaching that time in life, so that they know kind of what to expect and that it's okay to continue to engage in sport. It's also, unfortunately, not particularly feminine to be competitive, unfortunately, in our society. So that's also not an attractive feature.
Karen also challenges that one.
Okay, well, with that, I think I'll bring this evening's proceedings to a close. I'd like to thank Karen and Kim for a really terrific lecture. I've certainly learned a lot from listening to them. I'd like to say it was really, in terms of a lecture, DML, a deeply meaningful lecture. I think I'll have to start getting with the program and kind of coming up with all these acronyms to, be a little cooler. But really, a very comprehensive look at the experience of adolescence and the challenges our adolescents and young people are facing. And it really is I think the young people coming here are certainly fortunate meeting Karen and Kim and all of the team in terms of trying to negotiate this phase of life. So thank you.